The strangest thing I was ever offered at a studio job, it was for a cut of the profits if I let the owner sell my used underwear from classes online. Honestly, I wish that was the worst of it, because in 12 years of teaching Pilates across 4 countries, more studios that I can count, I've been fired from 3 and I've quit multiple. I don't even know how many. And looking back, almost all of them had warning signs. And I haven't quit any studios in a long time because I have learned the red flags to look out for. So red flag number 1 is if they ask you to sell their underwear online, and I've learned the signs to look for, red flags to look for. And most of them aren't as obvious. The attempt of trying to recruit you into an online underwear selling ring. To be honest, I don't know how much they would have paid me. I should have asked. Maybe it was like 1K per pair and I missed a trick there, but hindsight is 2020. Now, before I get into it, thankfully I've not been at the hand of suffering from every one of today's points personally. Some I've seen happen to colleagues, some I've heard about through a little thing called the internet. And to be honest, I'm at 2 amazing studios right now who give me perspective. It's almost like when you're finally in a healthy relationship after a bunch of toxic ones, that you start to actually recognize that those toxic ones were toxic and you can't believe what you put up with. And just like in a toxic relationship, I've noticed that a lot of the red flags for studios in the Pilates industry often get kind of normalized, and instructors go through a lot and it just gets kind of assumed that it's part of the job and we should just get treated like that because we're freelancers, we're not contractors, and we're disposable and replaceable. And that's not the case. So the earlier you can spot these red flags, the less likely you're going to end up in a situation where you lose work, lose clients, or most importantly, completely burn out and lose all of your enthusiasm for teaching. So what I've done, I've actually categorized these by when you'd actually encounter them, because that makes them a little bit more useful. Before the interview, at the interview, and once you're already in. And at the very end, I'm going to give you the one question I ask to any studio before I agree to anything. So red flag number 1, they can't tell you why the last instructor left. Now, I'm not saying that you should just sit in your interview and ask why the previous instructor left, but you can spot early on if there is a high instructor turnover. You can look on their Instagram if they're constantly introducing new instructors and then you don't see them again on their stories, then this might be a little bit of a red flag. Also, if there are multiple permanent blocks available from the get-go, this is potentially a bit of a red flag because it means someone was either fired or quit last minute rather than just a shuffle around or maybe just one block that needs filling. And it says something that the other members of staff didn't want to take it. Even bigger red flag is if they mention to you why they left and it was like they weren't good enough, they were unreliable, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's just not something that I would consider a good sign if they're bringing it up to this stranger that they've never met, who is you, on the first occasion of meeting. Red flag number 2. Now, depending if you have an interview via phone or in person, you might actually be able to spot this one before a single word has been said if you're in the studio. What is the cleanliness and state of the equipment in the studio? I know it sounds like it shouldn't matter too much, but it does. It is an indication of how much care and regard for the client experience the studio is having. In extreme cases, things like rusty springs or really old equipment where the foot bar could drop or the pulleys could break is major red flag. But things like, I worked at a studio once where the reformers were filthy, the floors were filthy, and then they had 6 flannels for the entire day. So you were just handing out these dirty flannels to wipe down the reformers with, which were gross. And for me, that's a sign of mismanagement, misallocation of resources, and an indication of a studio owner that is either trying to do it all or isn't very detail orientated. And when you're in this industry, the details matter so much. There are so many reformer studios around that the devil really is in the details. And if a studio doesn't invest in their equipment, then it's highly likely they're not going to invest in their staff either. If they can't maintain a reformer, they're not going to maintain you. Red flag number 3, nobody has heard of them. This one is kind of more of a gut check than a hard rule. And it's a completely different story if the studio is just about to open. But if this studio has been open for a while and you ask around and nobody's heard of them, there's no reviews present, no social presence, nothing, then that's worth noting. Not because small and discreet is bad, but because it raises questions as to they're established enough to actually have a proper community of people attending. And without a community, your classes are going to be empty and you're not going to get paid. Not to mention, empty classes are incredibly demoralizing, especially earlier on in your career, but even later on in your career, if it's consistently happening, it's going to get you to challenge your own self-worth. So now you're at the interview. These are the signs that show up in the room. And I think this is where most instructors miss it, because we're so wrapped up in trying to do well and impress them that we can often miss the signs if they're good for us. So red flag number 4. The owner has no business running a studio. I'm not objected to studios being opened by people who aren't instructors. In fact, I advocate for it. Often, teaching classes and running businesses are a completely separate set of skills. However, if someone has had a completely unrelated career, say they worked in the police force and they've never done fitness or Pilates, and then they want to open a Pilates studio, I would find that a red flag, because their work experience and life experience, it doesn't lend to understanding the Pilates industry and what clients want, nor does it offer the business perspective on how to manage people and get the best from your staff. So it's kind of like, how is this business going to work? And do I really want to be a part of it? Now, there's probably exceptions where it's worked, but it's something that I personally definitely take note of, is the background of the owner. My favorite studio to work at, the owners are not instructors. However, they do love Pilates and they have a strong background in management and business. They know what's their lane and they know what the instructor's lane is, and they are so good at collaborating and bringing everything together. Okay, so red flag number 5. When a studio won't shut up about high standard, then it's often an indication that they will criticize. This one is quite subtle but important, and there is actually a piece on this that was written from the business of Pilates. And the whole point of it is that high standards can be used as kind of like a buzzword to justify harsh criticism, depending on how it's being used. And I think that's exactly right. Most instructors get into it for the love of it, not for the money. I'm not saying that you can't earn a little bit of cash, but Pilates instructors are generally passion-driven, people-driven people. They are always going to be doing their best. And some bang on about high standards too much. They're often being a little bit almost like religious about certain things that are more subjective. Like, I did an interview at a studio once and there was no nuance. She said in the space of about 30 minutes, footwork is religion. And I'm not against working at studios that insist on doing footwork at the start of every class. In fact, I work at one that says that we need to do footwork at the start of every class. It's not even the amount of rules. Like, one of the studios I work at has so many rules and I'm super okay with it. It's more about the owner's attitude towards it and method or thought behind it. So for example, I work at a studio that is part of a franchise. It makes sense to have a lot of rules to create brand alignment and consistency. However, if I go to an interview at contemporary studio where they're saying specifically that they're not classical, but footwork is religion, pregnant people aren't allowed, and then just kind of peppering through other things you are and aren't allowed to do without a sort of cohesive manual, then that tells me that the owner has a personal ideology and opinion of how Pilates should be taught. And I'm never going to be able to live up to that because it's very subjective to her. Not to mention, in this one that I interviewed at, when I asked about instructor workshops and development, they offered nothing. They said, basically, we assume that the instructor will take that responsibility on board themselves, which pretty standard for this industry. But for a studio that is emphasizing high standards and certain modalities so hard, I would expect education to then be offered to develop that. Red flag number 6 is a non-compete clause. I've spoken about this in another video, why I'd never work at the small Pilates studios again. If you're presented with a contract that doesn't permit you to teach at other studios within a certain radius, especially if it includes after you've left, this is designed to limit your options. And in my opinion, it comes from studios that have bad staff retention. Basically, what's happened is they've had a lot of good instructors who then leave and clients leave with them. Good studio, I said it before and I'll say it again. Good studios know that good instructors are in high demand. They'll know that if they've got a good instructor, it doesn't matter if they're teaching at another studio half a mile away, their class will still be full. Obviously, this doesn't mean that in Studio A, you can be promoting Studio B, but we are freelancers. That means we get paid per hour and that our work is unstable, but in return, we are permitted flexibility and control over where we work and our schedule. Can you imagine if there was like a dog walker and then one of the clients just suddenly said, "You can only walk my dog"? You'd be like, yeah, all right, hi. It is one of the very few industries, again, where this seems to be quite normalized. Anyway. There are a few instances of non-compete clauses that I can be on board with. If you are in a contracted employment as, say, some kind of lead instructor or master trainer, and you are being offered as many hours as you want or need, then there is a case to be made. I personally still don't love it, but I also don't think it's a red flag. But yeah. Okay, category 3 is once you're in. So red flag number 7 is if there is zero onboarding, you're just kind of handed a room and left to it. And I found a whole Reddit thread on this that I thought was pretty telling. A new instructor posted about feeling super unsupported in her new studio, and she wrote, "They just assumed if I didn't do well, people would complain." And multiple instructors replied saying the same thing. No handover, no introduction to the clients, no feedback on any of the classes. Just, here you go, off you go. Often, especially newer instructors, unless you're doing something terrible, the clients might not complain. I mean, obviously you don't want them to complain, but you want that validation and reassurance that what you're doing is okay, because you don't want it to come back and bite you later that you've been doing something wrong for 6 months, which if you're new to the industry, it's quite possible that you might be doing. And had someone just checked in with you the first few weeks, you would have known and nipped in the bud straight away. I know some instructors do prefer autonomy, and that's completely fine, but there is a difference between autonomy and total abandonment. If they don't give you a basic onboarding, it means that they have no system for quality, and no system for quality means no consistency. And no consistency means that the clients that were already halfway out of the door before you got there, the studio is now blaming you for losing. The final thing I want to run down is the financial side, because this is where things get quietly quite expensive. So 3 things to look for in your contract. Number 1 is class cancellations. If there are no members booked onto a class, does the studio have the policy that they will cancel their class? And in that case, remember how many beds there are, because it's more common that a studio with 4 reformers will have 0 people than a studio that has 10 reformers. So that's something worth balancing into that equation. And if there is a cancellation policy, how much cancellation notice do they give you? Because while they might want to let the client book up to the last minute, if you're getting there for 7 a.m. and the class is cancelled, that's time you're not being paid for that you just wasted. 2 is unpaid extras. So this includes things like cleaning the studio, setup, covering reception. A lot of studios will ask this of you, and it will be clearly stated in the contract, and often it's not that much. And in many cases, your pay will reflect that. You'll get paid maybe a few pounds extra per class. But if you are staying half an hour after class and half an hour before for things you're not being paid for, and the studio is just trying to be cheap, that extent of those extras is a big red flag. Now, this might sound super obvious, but for some reason, it's quite common, especially at small studios, is incorrect pay or no pay at all. Especially with boutique studios, I've had it at more than one studio where they've forgotten to pay me. At larger studios, I've also had them pay me incorrectly. I've had to go through their invoices. Now, mistakes happen. We're human. That's fine. But generally, you can get a feel for whether it was a genuine error that never happens versus the personality type of the person running the studio or in the payroll role. And the studios where it's happened to me, it was a consistent kind of one thing after another. Being paid late, hours getting mixed up, like no one opening the studio, things like that just made the whole experience of teaching just not worth the money, because I spent the entire day before leading up to it stressing. Now, if you're specifically looking to work at boutique independent studios, I did make an entire separate video about red flags when it comes to boutiques. And I promised you the one question I will always ask studio before I agree to anything. And it's this: what do your other instructors do outside of teaching? A good studio will always have an answer for this question. It's not about the answer itself. It's about whether they actually know. And I think this is even more important with the smaller studios. Generally, larger chains have infrastructure built in to things like onboarding, checking in, CPDs, things like that, because it helps them with brand consistency and it streamlines the entire recruitment process. But a lot of smaller and boutique studios don't have that. So if they don't know their instructors at all, it is a massive red flag. And honestly, the dream studio will be like, oh, well, we've got this person that does this, and then we've got this person that does this, and I know that she's acting some of the time. And you get to sort of paint a picture of what kind of manager or boss they're going to be. The question costs you nothing, and it reveals everything. I hope this was a helpful video. And if you do have questions, do feel free to leave them in the comments. I'd be genuinely curious if there are any red flags I've missed. And feel free to write to me on Instagram. I always welcome your questions, content recommendations, and just getting to know my other colleagues in this industry. Have a lovely rest of your day.